So unfortunately, large or maybe in some cases fringe parts of the right have become increasingly anti-Semitic and anti-Israel since the October 7th. Many of the really sort of known creators or sort of a long-time representatives of the right-wing movement have been embracing a lot of the conspiracy parts of like anti-Semitism. So today we're gonna discuss parts of them. Few of them we have, or I think most of them we have discussed in the past, but this is just gonna be sort of a like one place where we go through most of it. And I think sort of the important part of like why going through this is that many of these people do have either the ear of Donald Trump or Donald Trump Jr. or sort of people around Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump's sort of support for Israel is one of the brighter parts of his administration. And if he starts shifting that in some regard, I think it can be very dangerous and what it would mean for, I mean, not only Israel, but sort of even the foreign policy of America in general. So I think that's why it's important to go through this. Joining me today is Michael Kaufman and Anders Ingemarsson. Hey guys, thank you for joining me today. And before we go to the first one, maybe just to get some of your first thoughts. So Anders, what do you make of this both rise of anti-Semitism? Now specifically, we are talking on the right, and as well as many of the sort of influencers starting to sort of play around with either even straight up like Holocaust denialism.
Yeah, so first let me say that I have a cold, so I am not responsible for anything that I'm saying today. I'm quite heavily medicated right now. But that being said, personally, I find these conspiracy theorists, I mean, I agree with you when you're saying that, yeah, they have a significant following and they need to be refuted. But personally, I find them incredibly tedious, and I have a hard time engaging and getting worked up about it. But I really appreciate the people who do because obviously that is important. Now, I realize that there is this phenomenon on the right, the MAGA right. I have a little bit of a bad grasp on how widespread it actually is. If it is truly a fringe or if it's is starting to infiltrate a wider audience. As you mentioned, Trump has been a staunch supporter of Israel so far. And given his family composition, if you like, there is certainly I'm pretty sure behind the scenes that he's hearing a lot of good arguments for supporting Israel. But obviously, if these kind of sentiments would catch on, then that would certainly be worrisome.
Yeah, so a few of the people I want to go through today is, of course, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. Now, Tucker Carlson is a big voice on the right. Now, he's sort of, I think, split off since he left the Fox, but he has been increasingly getting, more sort of into like actual conspiracy theories, more into like sort of like World War II revisionism, sort of like we were not the good guys, and all of that. So, but Michael, any sort of your first thoughts you have noticed about the rise of either straight up conspiracism or like anti-Semitism on some parts of the right?
Yeah, look, I think we should not forget that the Nazis are far right groups, and that's where this anti-Semitism, the worst anti-Semitism ever in the world, started. The growth of left-sided anti-Semitism. You could say, well, there was plenty of anti-Semitism in Russia, and it was left, but Stalin was he was fake left, right? I mean, he was a dictator essentially, and he was an animal, and he was military, and he just had all of his enemies killed. But the right was really responsible for the vast amount of anti-Semitism ever. The Republican Party and the people representing the right in America have, for the most part, distanced themselves from that, and it's coming back. I believe it's coming back because we've had such a failure of leadership at almost every level in America and the West in general, that this has become, you're allowed to do this now. This has two components. One is just a plain old anti-Semitism, and the other one is deciding that we're far enough distance from facts. And since kids are barely taught history anymore, you can get away with this kind of crap. I will tell you personally, I used to think Tucker Carlson, I thought, had an amazing career at Fox and had a good chance of becoming one of the premier speakers on Fox, and then he went off the deep end, and he continues to go off the deep end. Revising, showing that there were a few historians that think different numbers of Jews died in Auschwitz, whether it's 1 million, 2 million, 4 million, 6 million, or 8 million, is besides the point. I mean, everybody understands that the Jewish population in Europe was crushed and is just beginning to come back to World War II levels now. So you can say whether they died at Auschwitz or on the way to Auschwitz or whatever, and you can have all these silly arguments, but there's plenty of other facts that support the numbers that are currently there. Revising history, it's just not the thing to do now. Anybody who takes care of investigating crimes knows that the further away you get from the crime, the more difficult it is to put the pieces together. And the notion that we're better off equipped today to decide how many people were killed in any event 75 years ago or 80 years ago or 90 years ago versus the people that came right after this is obviously absurd. And I think it's a tragedy. I think fundamentally this is a failure of leadership, failure of our leaders to condemn this stuff, and lastly, failure of our professors, our so-called professors, to teach facts and to stop infusing everything with critical race theory and all the crap that they are spewing kids today.
Yeah, first, I want to just say something before we go further, because if anybody sees me sort of like smirking or laughing, one of my favorite comedian, Norm Macdonald, has a lot of like sort of Holocaust sort of like jokes. And while we're talking about it, I keep getting reminded of it, and it's hard to like keep a straight face when I'm reminding. So I don't mean to like undermine what like has happened. It's like a terrible, and also some people in the chat are reminding me of those jokes. So I just really want to come up, because this is like we'll go through like actual like Holocaust and like World War II revisionism, which is like the fact that this is not only I mean, in Europe, it's actually not even allowed, but sort of the fact that it's sort of allowed on a societal level, that the fact that someone can do these things and not immediately get sort of like completely, I mean, canceled for something like this. This would be one time when like cancel culture, I think, would be appropriate, when someone like, we are big. Well, let's go to the first person, because I think we can start it. So let's cover Dan Bilzerian. Now, we have covered him in the past. He's, again, someone who has been appearing on Piers Morgan, has been appearing on different sort of right-wing shows, and basically just spreading any sort of like anti-Semitism, any sort of like World War II revisionism he can get his hands on. Now, he made a tweet on X recently, which I before I was able to copy it for the second time, was actually deleted, because again, in most European countries, sort of like actual Holocaust denialism is banned. It's not considered a part of free speech, and so I wasn't able to even check it. So I had to get VPN to sort of find it. But what he said was 6 million Jews did not die during World War II. They lied to you. And then when anybody asked sort of like what he means by that, he sort of like posted like a random sort of like a string of words, which had, I don't even want to go through it, but sort of my first reaction to that, and then I'll go to Anders, is, again, when someone is sort of asking, well, I'm just, someone says like, well, I'm just asking questions, I just want to get more information about this. This is not their goal. Their goal is straight up to undermine what has happened, or sort of to get rid of those numbers, or have a problem with those numbers in any way they can. They have no desire to sort of find out the actual truth. Because again, if you want to find out how we came up with those numbers, you can go look at it. It's a different sort of either Jewish agencies, sort of like comparing the list of like actual people who they know have lived in Europe and now don't. It's a different like different countries have their own sort of numbers, and they try to put it all together. And not to mention, the big part of it is like simply we can't know the actual number. We know it's about 6 million, but it's really complicated because it was like horrible, and it's really hard to like get a precise like down to a single person number of people who have died. And as Michael has said recently, we keep sort of learning better of what has happened. It's not something you immediately know when it happens. But let me go to you, Anders. What do you make of again, someone trying to hide behind, well, I just wanna learn more, but pretty much the only thing they go for is straight up like denialism. You're muted. You're muted, Anders.
I mean, on some level, it's an indication of their weakness, the fact that they feel that they have to hide behind these, I'm only asking questions. You know, they know deep down that this is despicable, that it's wrong, and so on and so forth. I think the only way of and I don't know that you will ever defeat these individuals, but I mean, you just have to continue and restate the facts over and over again, and you know that's what you do, and your target is not the person in question. I think that's very important to keep in mind, that you are not necessarily engaging with that person. You are engaging with his or her audience, because in the audience there are a lot of people who are mistaken, you know, and they may be taken in by this argument, and that's why it's important to state the counter argument, the facts.
Michael, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with social media and the explosion of these talking heads, and I don't know what else to call them because they don't have any particular expertise, and frankly, I don't understand why anybody would follow someone like that for any good reason except for entertainment purposes, which if they were entertaining would be fine. But to get your facts from that when we have remarkable resources for actual facts, and not only can you get the facts from resources, but you should never look at, if you're serious about something or you're thinking about overturning a long-held view that you had, you should be looking at 2 or 3 minimum sources to figure out what really happened and who's telling you what the truth is. And then there's this growing notion that the truth is sort of your own truth, which is obviously the most absurd comment that anybody could make. It's also extreme hubris. People are not entitled to their own truth. They're entitled to the truth. Be very hopeful that your airplane pilot is not into his own truth, because your plane may not end up safely on the ground. Be very happy that the engineers who put their bridge together have the truth and not their own truth, so that you don't fall into the great beyond when the bridge breaks. And this notion that you're suddenly allowed to have your own truth about things that are factual is absurd. Facts are facts. 1 + 1 is 2, no matter how much you wish it weren't. And the fact is that approximately 6 million Jews, and I believe approximately 8 million other people, were killed in the Nazi death camps in World War II, or on the way to the Nazi death camps on World War II, or were shot in the ghettos that they were herded into before being transferred into the Nazi death camps. And you can get into all sorts of absurd arguments about whether it was during transport or not. Bottom line is that those are the numbers. And multiple sources have agreed on that. And to have some person who's clearly not an expert and hasn't delved into any of this deeply find a source, and you can always find a source for anything pretty much anywhere of this, is a sure road to destruction.
Yeah, and many of them try to hide behind people like David Irving, like people who try to sort of argue against the numbers. But again, it's like they do not have any desire to actually find out about the truth. They do not have any desire. Like whenever you have someone who sort of has a problem with the numbers or thinks it was not 6 million and it was less, it's never someone who's not also anti-Semitic. It's never someone who's like, well, I have the problem with the numbers, but no, I do not have any problem with Israel as a state. I do not have any problem with the Jewish people. I just do not think that many people died during that. It's always rooted in anti-Semitism. It's always rooted in some form of basically either hatred of the Jewish people or hatred of the current Israeli state, and sort of trying to undermine what has happened in the past. We have a super chat from first Jonathan, thank you so much, and a super chat from the new Bronze Age Collapse, who says, Dan, 1.5 million Armenians didn't die in World War One. Armenians lie to you. They spread anti-Turkish propaganda. I wonder how he would feel in this case. Now, I believe because Dan Bilzerian might be Armenian, and so obviously he recognizes that genocide, which of course did happen also. But yeah, it's the same sort of principle, trying to say that, yeah, basically something like that. Um, yeah, sort of trying to put it in the same way. But let's listen a bit before we go to Candace Owens. Let's listen to. I have one more clip from Twitter Spaces, I believe. Now this was, and I have to find a specific one. Now this was Twitter Spaces where you had Dan Bilzerian, but you also had Donald Trump Jr. and Andrew Tate there. Now, I think the fact that Donald Trump Jr. was there and sort of is listening to this part of thing is what's problematic. And basically, it's sort of edited clip, so ignore any other stuff. But basically, I think Dan Bilzerian was asked about what's gonna happen in America. So let's try to listen to the whole thing.
How did we get to the point where we have a government who isn't nationalist, who doesn't seem to really care about the country at all? How do we even get to this point? How do we avoid getting to this point in the future in your eyes?
APAC. That's how.
Any other indicators other than foreign powers? Anything, warning signs we can look out for as a country?
I mean, I just don't understand how you have a country where your politicians have more allegiance to a foreign nation than they do their own. And when you have that, it's impossible for anybody to be operating in the best interest of the country. And when they've got an APAC agent following them around and telling them what to do and what to say, I mean, you've got treason, and that's what we have. I honestly think that we have literal treason going on right now, where Israel's interests are being put before America's interests. And as long as that goes on, I mean, I don't have much hope.
Yeah, so I think he continues for a bit more. But again, it's the same sort of thing, like saying that Jews control American government. Again, Israel is a nation of about 10 million people. It's not like, again, like Israel is like I live in Slovakia. Israel is double the size of Slovakia. And the idea that like Slovakia could gain like double amount of power and we now suddenly control the American government is like ludicrous to me, even as an idea. But yeah, he also said like supporting Israel is like literal treason. So again, the amount of like conspiracism that's going on, and again in this specific Twitter Spaces, that was also Donald Trump Jr., who I think he among the sort of immediate the Trump's like circle, he is the one who has been playing around the most with these sort of parts of the right, which I think might be problematic. But Anders, what do you again make of this? And also, he of course mentioned APAC, which is the sort of go-to for these sort of people to sort of argue against. Now, again, APAC is an American organization, as any of these sort of political action committees, they do have a specific interest in mind. People who support it because they have they want certain things from their government, and this is one way of sort of getting around it, similar to, for example, the National Rifle what is it, NRA. Basically, so, there's one part is you vote for what you want, and one part is also you support organizations that try to sort of put forward what you want. Now, again, AIPAC is not supported by Israeli government; it's the American people who support it. But I mean, Anders, what do you make of this whole against conspiracism around the Jews are controlling American politicians, or AIPAC is controlling American politicians?
I think it's BS, as you mentioned. It's I don't know what the exact agenda is of AIPAC and what they do. I assume that it can be a mix of good things and of proposal to pro and or pro-Israel, but they can still be policies that they're supporting that would be increasing statism. But again, I don't know the details about AIPAC. In general, when it comes to these, so it's the same theme that keeps popping up throughout history. I mean, it has been going on for a couple of thousand years almost now. And again, I want to go back to saying that you have to refute the facts with facts. So or refute the lies with facts, I should say, and that's all you can do. I did an AI search here about how do you refute conspiracy theories, just to see. I was curious to see what came up. And it's what you expect. Teach critical thinking skills and information literacy to help people evaluate sources and evidence. Warn people about specific conspiracy theories before they encounter them. Encourage the use of fact-checking websites and multiple credible sources. And then they talk about engagement strategies, approach the conversation with a genuine curiosity and openness, use the Socratic method by asking questions that prompt self-reflection. This is obviously in a one-on-one situation, or if you're in an interview with something, you could use strategies like this. But it's, as I said initially, it's a tedious task, and I really appreciate the people who are willing and have the energy to engage in this, because it's definitely necessary.
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of two different ways to go, because if someone is, let's say, is on we'll go into it like Candace Owens or even Dan Bilzerian level of conspiracism, there is almost no help, because there is no actual desire to find the truth. There is no desire to actually find out what's happening. But when you have, let's say, people, I think I find it the most with sort of buying into, I mean, I live in Slovakia, sort of buying into Russian propaganda or buying into some sort of governmental propaganda is I think there are sort of ways to sort of explain what's actually going on, or what's happening, or that the purpose of that propaganda is to sort of make you doubt what's actually happening, and sort of to understand that better. But I mean,
yeah, if I may just chime in on that, and I think just to reiterate how important it is that you're clear of what your target is, that you are not necessarily addressing the conspiracy theorists, you're addressing the people who are listening to them, who may still not be that far down that path that you just described. I think Ayn Rand once said, in terms of what can one do, I don't know if it was in her essay with that name or not, but the least thing you can do is just speak up and say, I disagree, if you're in a context where there's a conversation going on. You don't have to say much more, but just a disagree can be enough for some people in that audience to just realize that, there may be another perspective here, because most people don't have a lot of firm beliefs and firm ideas, so they're willing to be swayed, and if you say I disagree, and maybe someone comes up to you afterwards and is curious and is asking why do you disagree, and then you can engage with a person who actually has an open mind.
I mean, Michael, what do you make of the the whole sort of Jews are controlling America narrative that has been increasingly getting more out there, let's say.
Well, it's like many of these theories, it's absolutely contravened by the facts. I mean,
Well,
the
of
amount
course
of
you would say that.
anti-Semitism in America is skyrocketing. And the notion that if Jews were controlling America, they would actually be propelling anti-Semitism is absurd, right? So, I mean, I don't think there's any part of American life where anti-Semitism is declining or even stable. It's horrendous on college campuses. It's increasing in the press. It's increasing by people like this idiot, and so on. So it's clearly absurd. The second point to make, and you don't have to be a genius to figure it out, that just because someone has pro-Israel policies doesn't mean they're being driven by Israelis or anyone who's pro-Israel. The other option would be to have anti-Israel policies, which to a large extent the Biden administration had, or at least they had very ambiguous policies and very antithetical policies that were sort of, at crosshairs with each other or at contravening each other.
Yeah, I would call it sort of like pro-Israel on paper. Like I think
it's
both
kind of a
parties,
bunch of bullshit,
yeah.
right? It's giving lip service to Israel and at the same time holding Israel at least one hand and probably more like 8 fingers behind the back, and so on. So you can do one other thing I try to teach people in science and medicine is to do the opposite. When someone gives you a fact that you don't like, to put a no in front of each part of it, meaning let's assume that America should have policies that are against Israel. Well, what does that mean? That means their policies were pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist, pro-Hezbollah, pro-Iran. Is that in America's interest? That's what's so remarkably absurd about all of this. So the first point is you can be pro-Israel without having Israel tell you to do anything. If you're pro-liberty and pro-democracy and multicultural states, which is Israel is the only one only one really in the Middle East, then you're basically replicating a lot of what America has and what Western Europe has over there, which means you're in favor of them. If you're against it, you're basically siding with a bunch of theocracies and autocracies. So on both accounts, it makes no sense. You have to think. None of this makes sense at all. And I agree with Anders. You have to speak up. I think I write a reasonable amount on LinkedIn. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I do for the reason that since bad people are speaking up, we have to have good people speak up. And these notions are so antithetical to any common sense or any kind of logic that they obviously are not reality, but they're fun to say. And as long as nobody goes up against it and smashes it down, they will continue. As long as the president of Harvard says that antagonizing people and frightening them is okay in certain contexts, then we're going to have this moral ambiguity and this crap spewing around. And it doesn't take long for moral ambiguity in sort of a neutral position of it's okay to deny the Holocaust because that's free speech to become Jews are controlling everything and it's all a bunch of lies. There's not a long distance between those two.
Yeah, and something you oftentimes hear from these people is, many of them try to hide behind sort of the idea of free speech, which I think for the most part, for most of what they say, I think does fall under free speech. Now, under American law, under most European countries, you can't sort of deny Holocaust, and I'll go into it a bit more, sort of bring example from my own country. But sort of they try to hide behind the idea of free speech, and when it comes to sort of some amount of cancellation, they say like you cannot even like question, you cannot even be anti-Israel, or you cannot even question like Israeli policy without like getting canceled. But when it comes to these people, they have like, or when it comes to when people start getting sort of canceled for being anti-Semitic or for being sort of like Holocaust deniers, it's not like you ask one question or you sort of you read one book and suddenly everybody is like after you. It's like you have to go pretty far into like anti-Semitism and in Holocaust denialism to when people start noticing and start saying like, hey, you're going kind of crazy. And it's sort of even similar to, like, again, I would not defend sort of the anti-Holocaust denialism laws we have I'll talk about Slovakia specifically, because I think they should fall under free speech. But even when it comes to like Slovakia, again, it's not like you read one book or you say one phrase and suddenly you're in jail. We have like a problem where we had like actual neo-Nazi party in the parliament that denies Holocaust, and it took a while since they actually got disbanded. Like the bar is still like allows a great amount of like I think like basically sort of free speech before like the even government in Slovakia like starts coming after you. And I think in Germany it's a bit harsher than it is here. But again, AfD is like a party that not only that I think has some amount of Holocaust denialism inside of the party, or sort of Nazi revisionism, and not only is allowed to run, but most likely or might even be in the government. So again, sort of trying to say that you say one bad thing about a Jewish person and suddenly you go in jail. Again, it's trying to spread the same or the similar amount of sort of like anti-Semitism. But let's well, first we have a super chat from the new Bronze Age Collapse. Thank you so much. And he says, I personally know what genocide denial causes. My people went through a terror famine that very few people know about in 1812, and they don't know because the Italian government in 1961 erased it. Now, if you can tell me which one is it, I think it would be interesting, because I tried looking up and I couldn't find it. So they must have deleted it pretty well, or it's really less known, so I haven't found. So if you post it, I can mention it. But let's listen to a bit from Candace Owens. She was on Piers Morgan some time ago, and well, let's listen to what she says.
The larger discussion that's happening right now is whether or not having survived a Holocaust gives you the permission to commit a Holocaust. And for whatever reason, people have been, what I would say, milking the Holocaust narrative in the same way that Black Americans were milking the slavery narrative, and essentially saying, like, we lived through this and we survived this, and so now nobody can say that anything we do is wrong. And that's the big issue today, is that we have so many people that will not recognize that it is totally feasible that a Jewish person, and I'm speaking here about Bibi Netanyahu, could do something as horrific as what was done to the Jews throughout World War II.
Now I want to comment on this part, because again, it's the same sort of thing. The idea that the idea that you can't criticize Israel. Like since October 7, you had protests happening in Israel by Israelis against the Israeli government. Like this is nothing new. You can criticize Israel. Everybody has been criticizing Israel. Candace Owens is here on a big show in the UK criticizing Israel. Like again, if we would never hear, like, you don't have people in North Korea on like a public radio saying, oh, you cannot even criticize North Korean government, because those people are deep in dungeon because they try to like criticize North Korean government. You don't, when in actual like totalitarian nations, you don't have people on public saying that you can't say something, because you cannot say something like that. But Anders, what do you make of Candace Owens's again, this idea that you can you're muted, by the way, this idea that you can't criticize?
Of course you can criticize, but I mean, well, she's totally distorting the facts here, you know. I mean, just the comparison between Israel and the Holocaust is, number one, ridiculous, because it's not a Holocaust. And then, you know, you ask the question, who started it? and Israel is engaging in a defensive war. And yeah, of course, people die. We know that. But, you know, to draw parallels between the Holocaust and what Israel has been doing in Gaza over the last 15 months or however long it is, it's just an abomination. It's ridiculous. So, but again, it's important. Yes. So Candace Owens here is going on in a relatively free country where she can speak her mind in front of Piers Morgan here, and I think it's important for us to realize that it's much better that it's out there, and you can have the discussion, and you can refute the arguments, because putting a lid on it, as has been done in many countries with hate speech laws and so on, that will just mean that it's fermenting under the surface, and it's almost like an infection that is kind of spreading throughout the body. But if we see it, if we're aware of it, we can attack it front and center. And in the marketplace of ideas, they will lose. I don't know who said it, but the only way for evil to triumph is for good men to say nothing, right? So we need a lot of good men out there who are attacking these viewpoints, but that's the only way of doing it. You don't want to put a lid on it.
I do disagree slightly, because again, I think when again these people are giving a stage, such as in the case of Piers Morgan, I think like we can still discuss the different sort of conspiracies that are around the Holocaust, that are around the 9/11. But when you have like specific people that are not only profiting from it, but are sort of being known for like the go-to person for like spreading conspiracies, I think it's in some ways it's much more harmful. Like you can still, people will still find it, and it still can be discussed, but sort of when you have like people behind it. Basically what I'm just saying is these people really shouldn't be given platform to like spread their conspiracies.
No, of course they shouldn't, but I mean we're in a relatively free society, and they will be given platforms, and we need to make sure that the good people get on those platforms too, because if you start to limit the platforms for these people, before you know it, your own platform will be limited too.
Michael, what do you make of Candace's?
Yeah, I think she one thing you learn when you become a smart aleck journalist and speaker like that is that you insert your philosophy as a given. So that it's lovely. Is the question is whether people who have had a genocide committed against them can commit a genocide against other people. So it doesn't question whether the people we're talking about are actually committing a genocide. That's a given. And it's for people that are not very bright, and for people also that haven't been trained in listening to this kind of thing, you can get confused very quickly because you start answering them. It's the sort of terrible question, when did you stop beating your wife? There's no good answer, because yes implies that you did beat her, and no, I didn't means you haven't stopped. And that's exactly what these people have done here. The first point is, as Anders so correctly said, first of all, there's no evidence of any genocide. Second of all, this is what happens in war. Third of all, Israel didn't start the war. And fourth of all of the genocides that are actually occurring are of no interest to Candace, the great supporter of humanity and everything. So the whole thing is absurd from the get-go. But and Israel, I think, in general, with its public relations, makes this mistake all the time. And certainly during the Biden era, when they got into answering questions that have no good answer. And what needs to be attacked is the supposition of the question. And that's where I think we need to say, your question is invalid. I do not accept it. What is your evidence there is a genocide going on in Gaza? There's a growing population there, even during the war. And you can go on from there. Genocide means that the number of people is being reduced substantially.
Let's we don't have that much time. Let's listen to a bit more from Candace, and then we'll go to Tucker.
Or throughout history.
But is that an accurate comparison? I'll tell you why I say that. as we know, I mean, whatever Dan Bilzerian wants people to believe, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Another 6 million people were murdered by Hitler and the Nazis. The numbers of people being killed in Gaza are, in my view, have gone way beyond what is acceptable as a response to October the 7th. However, you're still talking about, at the moment, a death toll of under 50,000. There's no comparison in the amount of dead people compared to the Holocaust. So do you understand why?
But it is a Holocaust, what's happening.
Well, is it though?
Yes.
So, I think language is really important.
I think language is really important as well, and that's
people
why
say Holocaust, genocide.
I
and so
think
on.
what's happening is a Holocaust. The burning bodies of the children that I'm seeing every day, and we spoke about this a little bit on my show, but I have recognized that the ability to see this stuff every day has transformed my opinion. Maybe the numbers wouldn't have gotten so high if people had spoken up when it was happening at the very beginning during World War II. And so I want to use my platform to say that I believe that they are intentionally executing a Holocaust. I think Bibi Netanyahu, there's tons of evidence, and obviously the Western media is not reporting on this, but the corruption trials that are going on with Bibi Netanyahu pertaining to October 7th and him editing the transcripts and the prior knowledge that he knew is now becoming extremely pertinent. It is a question as to whether or not he allowed the attacks to take place, essentially to then be able to go in and to commit this Holocaust against the Palestinians. Now, based on everything that I've looked into and stuff that I had not seen before, because the Western media doesn't cover it, Bibi Netanyahu caught off camera speaking about how he had no intention of following the Abraham Accords and how he was going to get around it. He has, I believe, genocidal ambitions, and that's enough. We don't need to dispute, go backward or forward. Do I think Bibi Netanyahu has genocidal ambitions against the Palestinians? The answer is yes.
So many things said there. Now, first, she brought up the Holocaust and said something more than lies. If somebody spoke out during World War II, would the numbers be less? Now, I have no idea who specifically she's talking about. There was a war happening during that time to stop Germany from conquering the nations around it. Now, it technically wasn't wasn't for stopping the Holocaust, because I believe we didn't know about the extent of what Germany really was doing until sort of the end of it, and when we started finding the camps. But if she's talking about Germans, they were complicit in it. It's not like Germany hid everything and suddenly started it. Those Jews were going somewhere. They were getting deported. Again, sort of speaking from my own country, Slovakia deported many of its Jews. It's not like they were... It's not like we knew or we thought they are sending them to some nice place. There was some assumption of what's going to happen. And now, again, to compare any of it to what Israel has been doing, again, after October 7, now, people say after October 7 without mentioning what happened on October 7, Palestinians have decided they just want to go into Israel and start killing Jews. That was genocidal intent, not Netanyahu trying to stop Hamas, trying to wipe out Hamas after the fact. Yeah, I mean, I'll go to you, Michael, first, because you mentioned it, and she straight up said, yeah, it's clear Israel is committing genocide. And you don't even have to prove it, because you think Netanyahu has genocidal intent, and because of that, it's like automatic.
Right. Well, first of all, if you're the victim of a group of people that attacked you, and then not only did they attack you, but then have gotten on their platform all the time and screamed about how they're going to continue to commit October 7th until there are no more Jews left, which is the definition actually of genocide, then you're allowed to have the view that you need to annihilate those people, because they've just come out and said publicly, which Candace and all these other naysayers love to forget. Because after all, terrorists are just misunderstood. And it is so beyond any rationale or forget about flourishing, just surviving, that it's absurd. Bibi Netanyahu is not committing anything. If Israel, if anything, has fought this war pathetically, if her definition of his genocide is that somebody attacks you and you basically fight back, that's her definition. If you happen to be stronger and somebody attacks you and you fight back, that's what she thinks it is. The fact that they want to murder you and your family and take your entire country away is not relevant to her. And she's going to use her ridiculous platform to say these things. It's fine. I personally think that there's got to be a better balance here, because I know that yelling fire in a crowded theater when there is no no fire is actually a crime. And I'm not smart enough nor savvy enough to figure out where that balance is for people who are allowed to basically say that 1 + 1 = 3 because my platform says it's 3, so we're going to go on there. That's what she's doing. These are, in sociology and in history and anthropology, we allow pseudo facts to enter in and have the same weight as facts. And it's absurd. But her rant against Bibi Netanyahu is so irrelevant to the entire situation, because you have to judge people by their actions. And the actions of Israel have been, if anything, underwhelming, underperforming, and patient, to the point where we have hostages still left in this miserable, wretched part of the world for over 500 days. That is not a country behaving as if it were committing any kind of major attack and even retribution for what Hamas did. And more importantly, what Hamas has said, both in its existence charter and in what it's said publicly all along, it wants to annihilate Israel. There is no two-state solution as far as Hamas, Iran, or Hezbollah are concerned. There is a one-state solution, and it means the destruction and annihilation of Israel.
Anders, what do you make of what Candace Owens
I
said?
think it's interesting, so I believe Candace Owens, she's a blatant racist, right? And she has a deep-seated hatred for the Jewish people. But she cannot come out, whether that is because she cannot acknowledge it to herself, or if it's a method of kind of hiding the raw truth here. But then instead, you're coming up with this conspiracy type arguments. You're comparing the Holocaust with its many million people who were murdered with a defense, which was an offensive war on behalf of the Germans, versus a defensive war with people being killed in Israel. And if that doesn't work, well, then there is a kind of a story that, well, Bibi Netanyahu, he probably facilitated Hamas, the attack in the first place, so that he could get a reason to get into Gaza and kill all these Palestinians. But all this goes back to her deep-seated hatred and her racism. And it would be an interesting psychological study, actually, to see if she's aware of it, or if she's just totally denying it. It actually brings to mind, for those of your audience who have read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, it's at the end of the book, and maybe I shouldn't give away the plot spoiler, but one of the evil characters of the book is finally forced to face how evil he is, and he basically self-destructs. And I don't know if the Candace Owens of the world are in a similar situation, that they are so blatantly, what's the word I'm looking for? Evading their own true self, that they have to cloak it into all these pseudo arguments that they're coming up with.
Yeah, I would probably say they don't think they are, because, Ayn Rand defined racism, or called racism, the lowest, most crudely primitive form of collectivism. And when you really think about the idea of racism, like, if you had to say it out loud, like, I hate this person because they have a different skin color than I do. That's such a ridiculous statement. That's such an insane thing to hold in your mind, that I don't think anybody could ever acknowledge that and then not, as you said, sort of disintegrate their thinking, because it's so outside of any sort of you can accept, or you can convince yourself on some unreasonableness, or some sort of maybe jumping a few hoops of like mental gymnastics. But to acknowledge that you're racist, it is truly mind destructive. So I think, yeah, she is racist, but it's yeah, I think people like her would never be able to sort of acknowledge it. And it shows of how destructive collectivism is, how destructive sort of these ideas are, because you cannot even acknowledge what you are without like completely like disintegrating your mind, or sort of destroying your mind, because of again like how ridiculous the idea of racism is. We have a super chat from the new Bronze Age collapse. Thank you so much. And he says, I think he speaks out about the terror famine. He says, Su famini se nu to si. The only articles you can find are in Italian. It was organized by the Viceroy Charles Felix of Savoia. So that's what he brought up earlier. So again, I've never heard about it, so I might check it out. But if it's all in Italian, it might be a bit harder to find out about that. But we don't have much time, but let's listen at least a bit from Tucker, because we should have probably started with him, because I think he is, in a sense, the most sort of potentially destructive, because again, I think he has the closest to actually Donald Trump's ear. I think he recently was even in the White House. So there were two clips I wanted to play. Let's play the second one where he was on with Piers Morgan.
You're avoiding
Fatuous
asking,
meaning brilliant,
you're avoiding answering my question,
which is why do we have so many guns?
No,
Because
no,
we're free.
no, didn't ask
Because
that.
we're free. Because
Didn't
no
say-
one can tell us we
didn't
can't
say
defend
that.
ourselves.
We all used to have guns too. No, we
And then
don't.
you guys, after the Second World War, which was like a liberation war, and you won, you lost all your freedom, and now you can't even express your political opinions, or they put you in jail. So, like, how did you win? How did you win? Is that what victory looks like? You lose all your rights, your economy gets destroyed,
You know why we
controlled by
won?
bankers,
We
and all
won.
of a sudden, oh, I won.
We won because I'm not conducting this interview in German, which I would
So
have
it's a
been.
linguistic
So
thing.
I'd rather not speak German and be goose stepping around my yard in England. Yeah,
Goose-stepping.
yeah.
But you are goose-stepping. People are arrested for praying.
We literally won our freedom from
Where's
people.
your freedom? Where's your freedom? You can get
I'm
arrested.
as free as you could possibly want a human
You
being to
can't
be.
defend yourself. You can't control who comes into your country, and you can't criticize government policies, or you get arrested. So how are you free? You're a slave, aren't you?
No, we
Really? How free are you?
We have cultural problems in our country
Could
and
you go on
societal
Facebook
problems.
right now and say, I don't want any more immigrants in my country. They're making it worse.
You could say that. What you couldn't say, because a lot of these stories, I have to say, in America, have been spun completely disingenuously. There's one case, for example, I see everyone trying to send me as an example of Britain's gone mad. Elon Musk has done it. There's a guy who got 7 years in prison. Actually, what he was doing, this guy, was he was orchestrating and directing rioting on hotels containing asylum seekers because he had a incorrect belief that someone who had stabbed 3 young girls to death.
So specifically, the part I want to cover is again the World War II, like revisionism, like in some ways, yeah, we in the West could have better systems and could have more freedom, but the idea that sort of Nazis would have been more preferable to America or the UK because we have some problems, or we have some problems with some policies or something. Again, the amount of like revisionism, and again, and that shows why he is so pro Putin, why these people are actively like pro dictatorships like China, like Russia, where because we have problems, then sort of what is that statement, the grass always looks greener on the other side, like, but it's like on an insane level, like the fact that you would look at the Nazis or the current Russia system and view it as like preferable to United States or UK or any Western country for that matter is again, I think like abhorrent. But Anders, what do you make?
No, I totally agree. I mean, it's just ridiculous what Tucker is doing here, and Piers Morgan is not exactly the best defender of
yeah, like we wouldn't
making the
speak
case,
German, like that, like that's the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, Tucker is the same as Candace Owens. He has his deep-seated beliefs that he probably doesn't want to acknowledge or recognize, and he's just cloaking them in these this whataboutism, that he's an expert in doing, and just I mean, Yeah, so yeah, Britain has a lot of problems, but how is that connected to the Holocaust? It's not. End
Yeah, I mean,
discussion.
Michael, what do you make of this? Like, again, Piers Morgan offered like a terrible defense. I think a proper defense would be, yeah, we have problems in the West, but we have ways to solve them. And when we recognize them, we can solve them. It's not, again, if you were in Nazi Germany, there will be no sort of way of, democratically or sort of properly like changing the problems we have.
Yeah, the way you kill them, that's how you deal with problems. And look, this behavior is nothing new. We see it with all the idiot kids that think who've been taught by their professors that communism can work, because after all, it has an amazing track record. That you see these kids with their globalize the intifada crap, because they have a better way of life. You have pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian crap. The dregs of our societies, complete failures as civilizations with zero human flourishing. And you have people that look at misery like that and pretend that somehow that's going to lead to a good life for folks. And it's really, it's very clear that Tucker Carlson has completely gone nuts. I mean, he's really psychotic. And he has fixed false idiosyncratic beliefs. I believe he meets the definition for psychosis. His belief systems are completely at odds with reality. And this is just part of them. And it's really unfortunate. He started off being really a pretty sane guy. And then he gradually lost it. It takes a lot to get kicked out of. I watch Fox, but you got to take it with a grain of salt, as you do all the news places. To get kicked out of Fox, not for a sexual harassment reason, is difficult. And I do believe he was kicked out because he became nuts. And his views have just gone to be anti-American, anti-Western, anti-democracy. And therefore, all of those things, by the way, are consistent with anti-Semitic.
So with that, I think we have covered decently enough the sort of the problems of, let's say, some parts of the right. Now, again, I hope none of them will get more traction, especially in Trump's administration, because as I've said, especially with people like Tucker and Donald Trump Jr., they are very close to Donald Trump's administration. So let's hope it won't spread more, because again, this is like problematic stuff, because it's also on the epistemological level. Like, none of these people actually care about any sort of process, any sort of truth. It's all just, we have some ideas, we have some feelings, and we want to go after them. With that, Anders, any last thoughts, and where can people find you?
No last thoughts. You can find me at andersingemarsson.substack.com, and my book, Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right, is available at an Amazon outlet near you.
And Michael, any last thoughts, and where can people find you?
Yeah, no last thoughts. LinkedIn, Kaufman with 2 Fs. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye-bye.